afternoon. Welcome to the May 27th, 2021 Planning Commission Transportation Committee meeting. This committee provides an opportunity to have an in-depth conversation with items contained on the agenda. Items can be referred to the committee to explore issues and identify impacts of a rezoning request. The committee discussion is less formal as compared to the Planning Commission meeting, and there are generally no time limits for the speakers. If any participants have issues with the technology, please send a message to the moderator. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of the presentation and any public comments. Finally, please be recognized by the chairperson before speaking. Our only discussion item on the agenda today is Z-67-20. This is the first time the case has been discussed. I would like to ask for a staff presentation from Hannah Rakow. Hannah, it's all yours.
All right, I'll share my screen. Can you see the slides?
Yes.
Great. So this is a rezoning request Z-67-20. It is a request to rezone a portion of 3249 Blue Ridge Road. It's about just under 4 acres, currently zoned R4, residential 4, requested to be rezoned office mixed use, 3 stories, parking limited, conditional use. The deadline for Planning Commission action is June 21st. So here you can see the current zoning context. The areas surround to the north, east, and south are predominantly residential. And then there are some nearby mixed-use districts, including an OX district directly to the west and RX district. Here is the overall context in the aerial view. This is west, so northwest of downtown, near the intersection of Blue Ridge Road and Durley Road. To the south there, you can see UNC Rex Hospital and kind of surrounding medical uses that are clustered there. And then there is on the other portion of this property that's not subject to this rezoning request is a church use. And then more broadly, there are some low and medium density residential uses in the area. Zoom in to see this better. See the rezoning site highlighted. The rest of this parcel is the area to the northeast that has the church use and the parking lot. The next parcel up Blue Ridge Road is also a church use near Edgemont Drive. And then you can see the attached houses to the south of Blue Ridge Road and townhomes to the north and west. Here are a few views of the site from Blue Ridge Road. This portion does have frontage only on Blue Ridge Road. It is partially forested at the back of the property and then undeveloped at the front and currently used, I believe, for parking. So this is a conditional use request. There are 5 proposed conditions. First one prohibits some uses that are normally permitted in office mixed use district. Second, limits the overall square footage of non-residential use to 60,000 square feet. Third, requires a minimum building setback from the back property line of at least 50 feet. And fourth, applies some hours of operation for non-residential uses. So that would be, those uses would be limited to between 6 a.m. and 11 p.m. So no overnight uses would be permitted under this condition. And then the last is regarding lighting, full cutoff light fixture design, and pointed away from the townhomes that abut to the north and west. So existing versus proposed zoning. Current zoning is a residential district. This request is for a mixed use district. The maximum height remains same at 3 stories. The residential entitlement would increase as we're removing a cap on residential density. And then non-residential uses are controlled by the proposed zoning condition, limiting that to 60,000 square feet. And then in a office mixed use district, there are limited use standards for some commercial uses such as retail that would limit that to a portion of a multi-tenant building. So the rezoning site is designated as institutional on the future land use map. This is a designation that is typically applied to university, hospital, and medical complex and religious uses. And it's likely applied to this property because of the church use on the other side of the property. The request of office mixed use would permit and increase the number of uses that are permitted on the site that are typically associated with institutions, things like office and medical use and other civic uses, and would also have those limited use standards for many commercial uses that aren't really envisioned as a main use in an institutional area. So for that reason, the request is consistent with the future land use map. Blue Ridge Road is designated on the urban form map as a transit emphasis corridor. This is a designation indicating programming for transit and wanting to have a balance between auto and transit and pedestrian accessibility, and recommends a hybrid frontage. The request includes parking limited, which is a hybrid frontage. It's consistent with the urban form. So this request is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. And as I mentioned, that includes the future land use map designation and the urban form designation, as well as a handful of relevant policies. So aside from future land use consistency, the request is also consistent with policies encouraging more compact development within city limits along major roads, and managing impacts of new commercial development, as well as zoning to increase housing entitlement and housing variety, and applying an appropriate frontage. There are a few policies with which this request is inconsistent. First two relate to the existing development immediately around on the site and compatibility with that development. The those conditions do have a cap on overall size of non-residential use at 60,000 square feet. That could permit development that would likely have a pretty significantly different massing than the surrounding area, which is primarily detached houses, and then there's some small office buildings as well. And then last policy rather, design guidelines. It's also speaking to compatibility and a transition and massing with the surrounding area, as well as is looking to see more of a limitation of parking between the building and the street. So that sums up the staff presentation. Again, your deadline for action is on June 21st, and I'll note that your last regularly scheduled planning commission meeting is on June 8th. So if the committee wants to hold this item, you would at least need to request additional time for planning commission review.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. I'd now like to hear from the applicant.
Good afternoon. This is Worth Mills with Longleaf Law Partners. I believe that we have a presentation as well. If we could put that on the screen. Thank you, Hannah. So again, Worth Mills here with Longleaf Law Partners, joined by Patrick Faulkner of the Keith Corporation. This rezoning would convert a portion of 3249 Blue Ridge Road from R4 to OX3 parking limited conditional use in order to construct a medical office building. At this stage of the rezoning process, we are still working with Raleigh's Transportation Department to confirm that the place of worship exemption for block perimeter and street stub requirements would apply to this property. Word from transportation is that this is the first instance that they have seen of this exemption, so they are confirming that this is the correct scenario to apply said exemption. But today we would like to present the rezoning application as it stands today and solicit feedback from the committee. At the conclusion of this meeting, our preference is that the case be referred out of committee with no recommendation for the June 22nd Planning Commission agenda. That would allow us the additional time needed to resolve our questions with the Transportation Department and continue to work with the adjacent townhome neighbors on a buffering condition. As Hannah mentioned, the deadline for Planning Commission action is June 21st, so we would also need an extension for the Planning Commission to make that recommendation. Next slide, please. This rezoning concerns approximately 4 acres of the existing 13.89 acre parcel at 3249 Blue Ridge Road. The property is currently used by the Summit Church, and they are selling the western 4 acres, which are currently vacant. As Hannah mentioned, they are used as excess parking. The church would continue its use after the sale, but this would obviously be rezoned and constructed for a medical office use. As we mentioned, the property is zoned R4. The future land use map designates the entire site as institutional, and Blue Ridge Road is a transit emphasis corridor on the urban 4 map, and we are proposing that office mixed use, 3-story height, parking limited, conditional use zoning designation. Next slide, please. This slide shows an aerial of the site with an outline of that 4 acre portion subject to the rezoning. Just to orient everybody, you've got the Harris Teeter Shopping Center on Edwards Mill Road to our west, north. And then you've got various medical uses at the Edwards Mill, Raleigh Road intersection, the Raleigh Children and Adolescent Medicine Center, Emerge Ortho, and UNC Urgent Care. We also have the Edwards Mill townhomes immediately adjacent to our northwest. Not shown on this image, but just want to reiterate that we are approximately a quarter mile from the UNC Rex Hospital complex. Next slide, please. This slide takes a closer look at the 4 acre portion of 3249 Blue Ridge Road. You can see the 2 office buildings to our southwest. You can see that the site is heavily wooded in the northwest area. I would like to note along the shared boundary with the Edwards Mill townhomes, that small strip of unfinished area. Currently, that's being used by townhome residents as a walking path, and it includes some shade structures, gazebos. The applicant has expressed his intent to memorialize that walking path with an access easement to the townhome HOA. Next slide, please. This shows the current zoning on the site, and I just want to note that this site would be bordered by mixed-use districts and the Summit Church. The office space zoned OX3 has an allowable building height of 3 stories and 50 feet. And then you have to our west, the Bentley Ridge condominiums and Edwards Mill townhomes zoned RX3. Both of those zoning districts also permit building heights of 3 stories and 50 feet. And then you have a multitude of mixed-use districts as you approach the Blue Ridge Raleigh intersection, where you have the UNC Rex Hospital complex. Next slide, please. This shows the future land use map designation of the property. As mentioned earlier, it is designated as institutional, and that is typically land occupied by schools, churches, and hospitals or medical complexes. We are bordered by medium density residential and office and residential mixed use properties. And while the use of this portion of 3249 Blue Ridge Road would change, that resulting use of medical office would be consistent with the institutional future land use map designation. Next slide, please. The urban format designates Blue Ridge Road as a transit emphasis corridor, meaning higher frequency bus stops, increased transit amenities, and that encourages a hybrid approach to frontage, which we have included in our rezoning with the parking limited frontage. I'll also note that Blue Ridge Road widening project is in its early stages. I believe that they are currently in the process of acquiring right-of-way and easement rights. The scope of that widening is from Durley Road to Crabtree Valley Avenue, and that includes improved sidewalks along our frontage and along all of the other properties that front Blue Ridge as well. And we think that the parking limited frontage will further the goals that the widening project set out to create. Next slide, please. This is a conceptual site plan that was prepared by Rick Baker with Timmons Group. Just to give you a sense of how we envision the building layout and the orientation of the building, both to the Blue Ridge Road and to our townhome neighbors. And you can see that we've located the building close to Blue Ridge Road, which is consistent with that parking limited frontage. And we believe that much or most of the forested area on the north side of our site would be designated as tree conservation area. As I mentioned earlier, we're still working with the townhome neighbors to draft a condition regarding buffering if that area were not to be designated as TCA, just in order to further provide assurances that there would be some visual break between our site and the townhomes. Next slide, please. These are our conditions as they exist today. We've been working with the Edwards Mill Townhome residents on these zoning conditions to mitigate potential disturbances that they could envision with a medical use moving into this site. We prohibited many of those uses that would otherwise be permitted in the OX district, just to help narrow down which uses would not be allowed. We want to, provide those assurances that we are going to construct an office building. We've limited the hours of operation to ensure that this is not an inpatient medical use where you have overnight patients. We've capped the building size to 60,000 square feet, and we have directed all of the light from any pole mounted fixtures in the surface parking areas away from those townhomes to mitigate any light pollution. The building setback is currently set at 50, although we are in discussions with the neighbors on extending that setback. Haven't come up with that definite number yet, but we do know that it will be significantly further than 50 feet. And as I mentioned earlier, we are continuing to work with those neighbors on a potential buffering condition in the event that the trees in the northern portion of our site are not designated as TCA. That concludes our presentation this afternoon. Again, we would request that this case be referred out of committee to the June 22nd Planning Commission agenda with an extension for extra time for Planning Commission to make that recommendation. We look forward to any questions or comments that the committee has, and we appreciate your time this afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, Worth. Now we'll hear from members of the public who have signed up to speak. I think we have 4 speakers. I would just, there are no time limits on comments. I'd just like to remind everyone to try not to be repetitive and to remember that this meeting is just an hour. It's immediately preceding our committee of the whole meeting, which starts at 4. So we're going to have to end this around 3:50 just so staff can make the transition to that other meeting. So with that, I'll ask Carmen to unmute our first speaker.
Sure. Our first speaker is Eric Walker.
Hi. My name is Eric Walker. With me, I have Erica Bernardo.
Hello.
I just have a quick slide that I want to present. We are part of the other neighbors that live off of Blue Ridge Road, not directly behind the proposed rezoning property, but definitely affected by the rezoning. I'll try to be concise here, but the 3 points that I wanted to make, the first one being that, effectively this office is going to change the face of the neighborhood. There's medical offices concentrated closer to UNC Rex Hospital. What I didn't see in the map was the amount of land available closer to the hospital. That would have been south on the map. So my question is, why do we need to encroach on the residential spaces along Blue Ridge Road? The second point I wanted to make was that this will add unnecessary traffic to the area during non-traditional work hours. In the proposal, I saw that the work, at least office hours, would be up to 11 p.m. My question is there a need for this? With the greater space down the road, with the medical campus concentrated on the less residential areas of Blue Ridge, why do we need, again, to encroach this activity on the residential part of Blue Ridge Road? And the last point I want to make here is that there's other neighbors involved. There's a community of folks that live here in a residential area. We asked the question, does it improve our quality of life? I believe it doesn't. This will increase higher traffic. There's potential for large late night medical offices, again, unfitting to this residential portion of Blue Ridge Road. That's all I had.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Walker.
Next, we have Mr. Bill Studebaker.
Okay, I'm here. Get the slides up. Okay, thank you. First of all, I live at 3936 Bentley Bridge Road, which is just down the street from the proposed zoning, and have been here 20 years. And I love the aspect of the development of mixed-use environment. I mean, I walk to the grocery store, I walk to my doctor's, wife and I walk to restaurants, to the pharmacy, even to the art museum. But we're sort of right at the edge of the mixed-use environment and the residential, so it's a good place for just going jogging through residential neighborhoods. So we get lots of dog joggers and dog walkers and so. But I have some concerns with this, and if we go to the first slide, that's not my slide. No, that's my old Hannah. There's a second set of slides provided, Hannah.
I'll try to find that.
Mr. Studebaker, would you like us to come back to you when she finds those slides, or do you want to proceed?
You can come back to me.
Okay. Carmen, can you unmute the next speaker, please?
Sure. Our next speaker is Jerry Miller.
Hi, this is Jerry. Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. I'm here with my son, who's a senior in high school and learning about civic engagement in the background. I live at 3325 Tall Tree Place, which is within 1,000 feet of this portion of Blue Ridge Road. I walk daily on Blue Ridge Road, drive daily on Blue Ridge Road. And I'd like to talk about some sort of bigger picture topics for consideration. I've had a good sort of rezoning 101. Hannah's been really helpful. Travis has been helpful, and others we've talked to. And they've really reminded me we want to focus on, is this reasonable and in the public interest? What are the impacts, and is it consistent with the plans? And I have a few areas where I think it really veers from those. The first you've heard described as the residential, this is a residential area, Blue Ridge. I just want to go into that a little bit further. Next slide, please. There's a very high density, as we've talked about, portion of UNC Rex Hospital. There's a very high density Crabtree Valley Mall area that we know about. And in between is like this 2-mile windy stretch of Blue Ridge. It's heavily treed. It's got many single family homes, a few different churches, some medium density residential, definitely, and green space. There's this one small exception adjacent to this property, but for the most part, it's kind of a windy road, and that's why it's being improved, widened a bit, straightened to make it safer, and to make it better for neighbors who live all along this 2-mile stretch to be able to kind of be interconnected to the resources around us. And I particularly feel that what's proposed here, this 60,000 square foot, 50-foot high building, is just really out of character with the neighborhood. If you go to the next slide, please, and one of the reasons that makes it particularly egregious is this is a topographical map showing the Blue Ridge Road, and you'll see that 447 feet is an elevation on that portion of the lot proposed for rezoning. I'm not too far away, but I'm in like green or yellow green. I'm already like 25, 30 feet below this area, as are many of the other neighbors. And if they're proposing putting up a 50-foot building and many of us are already 20, 25 more feet below it, that's effectively 70 feet higher. And I think that's a particular concern for me. There's also new subdivisions going in along Blue Ridge Road. And one thing I've talked to Hannah about is like looking at the whole picture of Blue Ridge, because we have new houses going in on Edgemont Drive, right behind the subject property. There's a new subdivision called The Founding going in just down the street. So this is an area where people want to live. And I think this particular building and particular site is very problematic and really not in our best interest. Next slide, please. Another topic that I want to broach here that I haven't seen described in the staff report or other city documents is that there is a Blue Ridge Corridor Alliance that's really trying to do smart growth and development, and it's working with the city, with the state, with developers to try to work in partnership. And it has a very well established health and wellness district, which you can see kind of shaded on that slide. And then you can see the red arrow where our lot is. We are well outside of that district. And then in addition, there was a feasibility study done for a municipal services district for the Blue Ridge Corridor, similar to what's been done on Hillsborough Street or downtown. And that feasibility study actually has 3 different outlines of what that district might look like. A smaller one, a bigger one, and the biggest one. This Blue Ridge lot that we're looking at here for rezoning isn't included in any of those. It's well outside of all of them. So what you have here is a number of older medical buildings and some very new buildings up near Rex Hospital who people need more space. Maybe they want newer facilities. And is it reasonable that they should come down Blue Ridge Road into our residential neighborhood to build the facilities that they want, towering above many of the homes that have been there for years? It doesn't seem like that to me. It's a particularly negative visual impact, as well as changing the character of the neighborhood. And those MSDs, I'm just learning about them, but I understand they have higher taxes and fees associated with them. Again, do we want medical and wellness related facilities marching down Blue Ridge Road to escape some of the higher taxes that might be up the hill? That's concerning to me. It's an area I need to understand better, but right now it's concerning. Next page, please. This has to do with the institutional designation. Again, I'm new to this area, but I read in the city how they define institutional in the 2030 plan and other documents. And it does not seem clear to me that a single medical building in isolation really meets the intended definition of institutional. And there's this lot and 2 adjacent lots. There's a lot behind it that behind the green space that's also institutional. I did talk to people about this to see if they knew of any other part of the city where there was church property that had extra space that had been subdivided to make it into commercial or mixed use. And we can't think of any examples. I don't think that's a precedent that any of us would want to be set in a residential neighborhood. There's churches in residential neighborhoods all over this city. So I don't think that single medical building meets this definition. And B, I think that the way it's described in the staff report, with all due respect, as a consistent LU 1.2, I don't agree with that logic. I don't follow that logic. I think this is an area that needs to be explored more carefully. Next slide, please. And my final slide. And just one thing that hasn't been mentioned by the developer, there's a lot of focus on the trees on the back of the property adjacent to the townhomes, and I respect the desire to preserve those. There's also this huge willow oak that some people think is over 100 years old, right up near Blue Ridge Road. If you look at the maps, you'll see it. And there's two similar trees, you just walk down the street, one piece of property over, there's two very similar trees. They look like they're the same vintage, which were actively protected in a 1999 condition when there was some development there with an ordinance condition. And I really think this is something that we want to also consider as well for any potential rezoning or use of this property. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miller. Did we find Mr. Studebaker's slides?
Yeah, it sounds like we had the right slide deck. Is that right?
Okay. So then we're ready to hear from Mr. Studebaker?
Yes.
Okay, great.
Right. I thought I had deleted the second slide and I hadn't. Just
Okay, no problem.
Jump right in. Oh, now slide after this one. Okay, I wanted to go back. There. I wanted to look at what the current zoning could allow. Now I know the presenters from Longleaf we're talking about something less, but the proposed zoning conditions will still allow something much more substantial on that property, and plans can change with development. So this is 2709 Blue Ridge Road, 60,000 square foot medical office building, just a bit below 50 feet in height. 50 feet of setback from Blue Ridge Road. And as I said, it's zoned OX3. Next slide. And we have talked about this a little bit and seen a variation on this. I won't spend much time on it, but this is the environment that potentially something that size could be set into. And even the Planning Commission staff report recognized that that in itself is a significant shortcoming. In particular, it's inconsistent with the policy that new development opportunities within the existing urban fabric of Raleigh are implemented without adverse impacts on local character and appearance. And this would be a very substantial adverse impact, and that would permit development that varies in form and massing from the surrounding area. And these are all very livability kind of problems for this development. But not to hash that back over too much, let's go to the next slide. And this is that same, the lot at the same 2709 Blue Ridge. And this is the real concern I have. There is a couple of identical buildings next to each other on Blue Ridge Road, right across from Rex. There's this one and 2605 Blue Ridge. And I have doctor's offices in both of them that I go to each of them several times a year. So I'm really familiar with the traffic in and out of these buildings. And there are 3 entrances to the parking lot here. one of them off of Blue Ridge. The other two are on Lake Drive, and the effect is to funnel traffic away from the uncontrolled entrance on Blue Ridge out onto Lake Drive, where it then can go either direction to controlled intersections with either Blue Ridge Road or Edwards Mill Road to get out of the area. Next slide. Now the real impact here is that in the proposed lot, there's only going to be a single entrance right off of Blue Ridge Road. And that'll be in the front entrance. Now the staff report suggests something like 900 entrances or exits a day from there, with about 100 an hour at peak times. Even the pending improvement project won't change the existing lane configuration from single lanes in each direction, plus a turning lane. Now, I live, as I said, on Bentley Ridge Road, which exits onto Blue Ridge, just basically a block down there. That's the small arrow on this slide. And I can tell you that there are a lot of drivers on Blue Ridge, and typically I'm doing it more in the middle of the day, who are not terribly patient for cars slowing down to make turns off of Blue Ridge. And they'll go flying by you using the turning lane to pass in the turning lane. And there have been times I've been coming from the other direction where I've had to take evasive action from cars doing that. I really am concerned that the proposed volume of vehicles going in and out of this office complex is going to be a lot more problematic in terms of the safety for ingress and egress to that parking lot. It could potentially be alleviated if there were some kind of change in the design that allowed exit back through the Summit lot onto a extended Edgemont connector. And the Edgemont connector was actually mentioned in the staff report, but none of the traffic planning really considered the impact that would have on either the Edwards Mill townhome neighborhoods or the Edgemont Drive neighborhood off of Blue Ridge. I'm very concerned about how that will impact the livability of the area. And I had some other comments regarding the policies that I think Jerry has dealt with. So I will let that go from here. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Carmen, can you unmute our next speaker, please?
Sure. Our next speaker is Ms. Susan Bowman.
Good afternoon. My name is Susan Bowman. My husband and I live at 3308 Blue Ridge Road. We're adjacent to the proposed zoning lot, just right across the street. We have lived in this neighborhood for over 10 years and know residents who have lived here for over 30 years and then new residents who have just moved in within the last month. With this proposed change to our neighborhood, we have been able to petition our residents and have over 200 signatures expressing opposition to the rezoning proposal as it's currently presented. We've submitted a letter to each member of the Planning Commission and City Council representative. We have also written letters to the Summit Church leadership, the Longleaf Law Partners, who represent the applicant and the developer, and have offered to discuss the concerns of the neighbors with them. Neither Summit Church nor Longleaf Partners have responded. Yet the developer has met and worked with townhouse homeowners associations to negotiate conditions that represent their concerns. The Blue Ridge Road residents and surrounding areas will be the most impacted and have not had their concerns addressed and would like the opportunity to discuss conditions that we will be dealing with by developing the property into a medical office building. Some of those things are an increased amount and flow of traffic, the ingress and egress of the property into the property and out of the property would be hazardous. There will be safety issues for pedestrians and bike riders who will be on the pathway of the new widening project once it's complete, and even now. Also hazardous will be the residents' ability to enter and leave their driveways, the noise and light pollution of the building onto the Blue Ridge Road area residents. The hours of operation are outside of normal office hours. Additionally, the imposition of a 60,000 square foot, 50-foot high, 3-story commercial building on a 10-foot ridge across the street from single-story homes in a residential neighborhood. This project is, as it is currently described, is incompatible with the residential neighborhoods and the streetscape of Blue Ridge Road. Your support in opposing this rezoning request will be greatly appreciated to the residents of Blue Ridge Road and the surrounding areas. If for some reason you do approve this rezoning request over our objections, we would like to ask that you consider following suggestions to mitigate the impact of this building. One of those is to restrict the building to be limited to 2 stories, operate during normal business hours, and additionally have a minimum setback of 50 feet from Blue Ridge Road. We would also like to request a reasonable alternative to the parking limited frontage and move the building back from the street to the back of the property. It will be less imposing on the 1-story homes across Blue Ridge Road and will also save a 100-plus-year-old oak tree to achieve a park-like setting and less of an industrial look. Transportation Committee members, I want to thank you for your service and your talents that you bring to the Planning Commission. And I want to also thank you for your consideration. And this is from Susan and Daryl Bowman.
Thank you, Ms. Bowman. Carmen, was that our last speaker?
Yes, that is our last speaker from the public.
Okay, thank you. Thank you all for your comments. We really do appreciate them. I'm going to bring the discussion back to the table now, to the committee. Does anyone have questions or comments? Commissioner Fox?
A question about the exemption for block perimeter that was mentioned. I'm wondering, Jason, if you could talk a little bit about block perimeter and what the intent of that exemption allowance is, and if this is applicable in this case.
Yes, ma'am. This is Jason Myers with the Transportation Department of the City of Raleigh. The word may not have come to the applicant yet, but there was a request of our zoning interpretation group, and I may botch the name of that committee. David York or Travis could explain their function a little bit, but they verified yesterday that because the land that would require that extension of Edgemont is owned and operated as a part of a church, and there is no requirement to connect that street through any sort of development of that lot, including subdivision of this subject property off of that lot. So I think that the exemption that Worth mentioned as a possibility has been confirmed by city staff at this point.
Commissioner
Can I
Fox?
thank you. Follow up along those lines too, because if there's just high level, conceptually speaking, one way to distribute traffic, if that's an issue, is to increase grid density and allow connections. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it is absolutely the extension of Edgemont, though I don't necessarily consider it to be a part of the zoning case because it's a little bit off-site, but connections of streets like that is very much consistent with our comp plan. There's a number of policies about street connectivity in the transportation chapter of the comprehensive plan. And those are kind of regulated by the Unified Development Ordinance, which regulates block perimeter. And I think in the staff report, it mentions what the existing block perimeter is being almost 6,000 feet, 5,700 feet currently. And a residential district is set by the lot size. A mixed use district is either 3,000 in this case, or if it were taller, it'd be a little bit smaller. So it's a much larger block, which means that driving distances are much further, and the amount of traffic on any given street around that block is likely to be higher. So a connection there would not only help distribute traffic and provide for more direct and calmer traffic, it also helps provide more efficient city services, as trash trucks don't go down in the block and turn around and run empty or run unproductively back. But again, that's Edgemont Drive is not necessarily directly related to this case, because the zoning district wouldn't, if this is approved, wouldn't touch Edgemont Drive in any place.
Commissioner.
Last one, I swear. Basically what we're saying is, in order to alleviate some of the traffic, you would recommend that road be connected, but in this case, it's not desirable from the perspective of those single family homes and the townhouses. And then similarly, the location of the building on the site, it being pulled up towards the street, might be perceived as an impact to the neighbors across the Blue Ridge, but by pushing it back, it would be eating into tree save and further impacting the townhouses. So it's like a balancing act. No one needs to respond to that. It's just an observation.
Well, you just summed it up, Commissioner Fox. There we go. Okay. I have a couple of questions. I am watching the time, but I have a few questions. One is, if the Blue Ridge Road extension project that was mentioned, not extension, widening, would that impact the tree that was discussed? I'm just wondering if the tree is going to be affected anyway. Yes, Jason.
I actually went and looked at the current construction plans and kind of compared to where that tree is, and I am 99% more sure that that tree is nowhere near any of the grading or right-of-way impacts of the street. It appears as if the tree is maybe 50 feet off of the right-of-way, and there's a little bit of a right-of-way acquisition in that area, but not nearly enough to impact that tree.
Okay, thank you. My other question is for the applicant. We heard a couple speakers say that they hadn't received responses or hadn't been involved in the discussions around forming conditions. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of who you've been working with to develop your conditions?
Yes, ma'am. This is Worth Mills again. So we were contacted by Hayes Finley, who is representing the Edwards Mill Townhome HOA, about increasing, this was during the neighborhood meeting process, about increasing certain aspects of our zoning case to provide more assurance to the townhome community. And because they are our adjacent neighbors, and because we are already dealing with the encroachment with the walking path and the gazebos, we felt like those were the neighbors that could potentially be most impacted by the rezoning. And so we have tried to frame these conditions as to provide that visual buffer for the townhomes through obviously a building setback from the shared boundary line. As I mentioned earlier, we're continuing to look at how we can draft a condition around buffering in the event that the trees in the rear of the site are not designated as tree conservation area. And so those neighbors are where we have devoted most of our attention, and as far as who we're looking to influence the zoning conditions.
Okay, if we do vote this out without a recommendation, so you can continue working on your conditions and get anything cleared up with staff, would you be willing to talk to those other neighbors who have expressed concern and a desire to be a part of that process as well?
Yes, we could, we could schedule a Zoom call or meet with those neighbors individually, however they prefer, to listen to, some of the ideas that they may have for zoning conditions and to see how those are, to see if they are compatible with what we have already committed to for our townhome neighbors. One of the challenges of this site, and although it is 4 acres, we do expect, more or less the top third to be, unbuildable due to TCA and that existing walking path. And so, being able to build and park the site, we do have some physical restraints in that sense as to, where we can place the building, and then also, how does the parking fit around that building, and is that compatible and conforming with the parking limited standards that are recommended by the urban form map here. So happy to have those conversations. It's just a matter of trying to figure out if we can marry both sides' concerns into a set of zoning conditions.
Right. Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any other questions or comments from commissioners?
Sorry, Chair Bennett, I know we have to run, and I just want to pose these, and I'll let you sort of figure out where we're going to go with this. But one, and I should know this, but is there a build to in parking limited, and what is that build to? Maybe Travis.
The build to. Oh, go ahead, Hannah. I'm sorry.
Sorry, Hannah. Go ahead.
That's all right. The max build to and parking limited is 100 feet.
Okay, so it could be outside of that large oak then. They could. I mean, I know Jason. I know you just threw that number out there, but that 50 feet, we potentially could put the building out inside the build to, but outside the tree zone. Is that correct? Potentially, nobody's committing. Travis, you look like you were squeaming a little bit there.
Yeah, it looks tight. And so I'm looking at the aerials and just doing an eyeball measurement. And the tree itself, it's hard for me to find the center, but it looks like it's about 75 feet from the existing right-of-way line. I don't know what the right-of-way acquisition width is at the frontage of this property. I would assume it's somewhere in the neighborhood of 6 to 8 feet, because
Gotcha.
that's the offset from the neighborhood property. So it would be tight.
So to Commissioner Fox's point, we're sort of swimming upstream with the TCA in the back of the site and the tree in the front of the site. Can I confirm that walking path and gazebos are on the applicant's property? Can I confirm that with somebody?
Anybody from, Travis looks like he's thinking.
The applicant Worth Mills can speak to that.
Okay.
Yeah, so in the surveys that we have had performed, that walking path, it does encroach into the applicant's property.
Okay, so again, we're sort of, to Commissioner Fox's point, we're sort of battling on both sides. We're trying to figure out this. And then my last question quickly is, and again, I should know this, but this is maybe good for Transportation Committee. When exactly is peak hours? We're talking 90 trips roughly in peak hours, morning and evening. What can you define what those peak hours are, what that duration is, and when it is?
My colleague Ann Conlon is, oh, there she is. She's probably more qualified to answer the question.
Oh, I froze there for a minute. Yeah, the peak hours can vary by location. So we collect traffic counts and we look at where the peak lands. But, you know, roughly in the morning between 7 and 9 a.m. in the afternoon between 4 and 6 p.m.
So it's a 2-hour period. We're talking roughly 90 additional trips for this.
Well, I'm sorry, it would just be within 1 hour. It's just that hour could land somewhere in that.
Okay.
2
Okay.
hours.
Thank you. That's very helpful. Thank you. I mean, Chair Bennett, I don't see a lot of issue with this. I know they're still working on some conditions, and so I'm happy putting it, you know, out. I confirm. I'd agree with you on that. I don't see issue with it, but I know they're still working on some conditions. And to your point, perhaps there's some additional conversations with neighbors that might be beneficial. So.
Okay, well, I was going to try to wrap up, but I think we've kind of hit all the points in our questions and comments. So it sounds like looks like Commissioner Fox is itching to make a motion. So go right ahead.
So with that, I make a motion that we refer this out without a recommendation to allow the applicant to adjust conditions and have additional conversation with the neighbors across Blue Ridge. Do you need a consistency statement, Mr. York?
No, not for that. You're not making a recommendation.
Perfect.
Did you want to, I'm sorry, did you want to address that you're referring it out to, are you referring out to the 8th or the 22nd? If it's the 22nd, you'd want to accompany that with a recommendation that on the 8th, the Planning Commission request additional time.
Correct. So let me add to my motion, referring out without a recommendation to the meeting of the full Planning Commission on the 8th, where we would ask for additional time on this case.
Okay, I second that. I keep wanting to raise my hand. Is that everything, Travis and Mr. York? We covered it all. Commissioner Chair Fox.
You need to show a hand vote on that one.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm not used to this. Okay, all in favor, raise your hand. That's 3-0, it's unanimous. So we will refer it to the next Planning Commission meeting, and at that point, we will request an extension of time. All right, everybody, thank you. And thank you again to members of the public who shared their comments. Thank you to the applicant. Thank you to staff. We'll see you in a few minutes for Committee of the Whole.
Thank you. Bye.